The greatest robbery in history wasn't for gold. It was for an entire civilization. And it was orchestrated by an illiterate swineherd who couldn't even write his own name, Francisco Pizarro. He was a man with nothing to lose. The illegitimate son of a Spanish colonel, abandoned to his fate, he received neither education nor inheritance. His world was the harsh lands of Extremadura, where survival was the only lesson. While other conquistadors like Cortés were educated noblemen, Pizarro was a product of the grimiest, most ruthless reality. He didn't read books about glory. He saw it in the glint of a stolen knife and heard it in the jingle of coins. When rumors of the New World reached Spain, it was the only ticket out of destitution for men like him. And so, already past his prime by the standards of the era, he heard it, a legend. Whispers of a fabled land to the south where gold literally lay underfoot, an empire called Biru, or Peru. For most, it was just a tall tale, the drunken ramblings of sailors. But for Pizarro, it became an obsession. He saw more than just treasure. He saw a chance to rewrite his life, to seize from fate what was never meant for him, and he wagered everything, twice. His first two expeditions were catastrophes. Instead of golden cities, he found impassable jungles and poisonous swamps. Instead of welcoming natives, he faced deadly arrows. His men died from hunger, disease, and despair. His ships rotted. Investors turned away, calling him a mad old man chasing a phantom. Anyone else would have given up. But Francisco Pizarro was forged from different material. Every defeat, every humiliation, only hardened his obsession. He looked into the faces of his exhausted, near-mutinous men and understood there was no turning back. In Spain, the same poverty and obscurity awaited him. But here, beyond the jungle's veil, however fleeting, was a chance for greatness, and he was ready to pay any price for it, with his own blood or the blood of an entire empire. This unwavering resolve wasn't born in the jungles of Panama. It was forged in the dirt. He was a nobody, literally. A bastard. In 15th century Spain, this was a brand, a condemnation. You had no father's name, no home, no honor. You were a living reminder of sin and empty space. While his half-brothers received an education and learned to wield a sword, Francisco herded pigs. His university was the pigsty. His teachers were hunger and cruelty. He didn't learn to read words, he learned to read people, their fear, their greed, their weaknesses. He saw how his father, a celebrated colonel, lived by one set of rules, while for him, his illegitimate son, there were entirely different rules, none at all. It was there, in the humiliating silence of the Spanish province, that something broke within him, or perhaps, conversely, something was forged. He grasped a simple truth. The world isn't divided into nobles and commoners. It's divided into those who write the rules and those who are forced to live by them. He resolved never to be the latter again. Honor, laws, God, these were pretty tales for those who already had everything. For the rest, there was only force. The force to take what wasn't given by birthright. Every sneer, every scornful glance, every reminder of his insignificance only fueled the fire within. It wasn't merely a lust for wealth, it was a thirst for revenge. For him, the conquest of Peru wasn't just an acquisition of land, it was an act of creation. He was remaking himself, burning away the old name he never truly had with fire and sword. He wasn't after the gold of the Incas, he was after his own name, which he intended to inscribe in history with blood. Spain itself at that time was forged in blood and steel. 7 centuries of the Reconquista, a continuous war against the Moors, had ended. The enemy was expelled. But the country faced an unexpected problem. What to do with thousands of men who knew nothing but how to fight? An entire generation of hidalgos, younger sons of nobles left without inheritance, saw war as their only path to social advancement. Now the war was over. These battle-hardened, proud, and impoverished men became a dangerous, simmering mass. They needed a new war, a new purpose, new gold. Then Columbus discovered America. For the Spanish crown, it was salvation. The New World became a giant pressure-release valve, a place to unleash the most ambitious and ruthless. The crown devised an ingenious and cynical solution. It wouldn't spend its treasury on risky ventures. Instead, it created a venture business based on bloodshed. Any desperate captain could come and request a license for conquest. The terms were simple. You find the money, you hire the mercenaries, you risk your own life. If you failed, it was your problem. But if you succeeded, 1/5 of the spoils went to the crown. The rest was yours: glory, land, titles. This wasn't state policy, it was legalized adventurism, where the state skimmed the cream without risking anything. This system was an ideal filter. It weeded out the prudent and cautious. It promoted only the most obsessive, the most desperate, those with nothing to lose, those willing to wager not just their lives, but their very souls. Pizarro was no anomaly. He was the perfect product of this system. The era itself sought out men like him. A world built on risk gave rise to the ideal player, ready to stake an entire civilization. And then came the moment, Isla de Gallo, 1527. The point of no return. The remnants of his second expedition, a handful of exhausted, starving men, were on the verge of mutiny. A ship arrived from the mainland, not with reinforcements, but with orders to return. It was the end, a failure. For everyone, that is, except Pizarro. He walked onto the sandy shore, drew his sword, and etched a line in the sand. Then he turned to his men. His words would become legendary. To the south, he declared, pointing towards Peru, lie death, hardship, and hunger. But at the end, wealth and glory. To the north, he gestured towards the ship, lies Panama, and poverty. Choose. Without a backward glance, he was the first to step across the line. After an agonizing pause, only 13 men followed him. 13 fanatics, staking their lives on the obsession of one old man. This handful of men accomplished the impossible. On a small brigantine, they continued sailing south and finally found what they sought. The city of Tumbes, the first outpost of the Inca Empire. They had no strength for an assault, so Pizarro played his second brilliant bluff. He didn't attack. Instead, he sent 2 of his men ashore with gifts. The Incas had never seen white, bearded men. They greeted them not as enemies, but as curiosities, perhaps even as gods. The Spaniards were led into temples whose walls were covered with gold plates. They were shown gardens where flowers and animals were crafted from pure silver. Pizarro, observing from the ship, saw not hospitality. He saw fatal naivety. He understood the crucial point. This civilization had no idea who it was dealing with. It was rich, powerful, and utterly defenseless against his type of predator. Armed with irrefutable proof, he played his third, most audacious hand. He didn't return to Panama, where arrest awaited him. Instead, he sailed directly to Spain, straight to Emperor Charles V. An illiterate adventurer stood before Europe's most powerful monarch. He had no eloquent speeches, but he possessed something that swayed kings more effectively than any words. He laid out golden ornaments on the table, displayed strange animals, llamas, and presented the natives he had brought with him. He didn't beg, he proposed a deal, and the emperor, seeing not a ragged commoner but a key to untold riches, agreed. Pizarro received the title of governor, the rank of general, and the official right to conquer Peru. The illiterate swineherd, despised by his own father, had just received a royal license to plunder an entire empire. He had deceived everyone, his investors, his men, his governor. Now only one remained to be deceived, the Inca emperor himself. He returned to Extremadura not as a hero, but as a recruiter. His methods were as crude and effective as he was. He possessed no hypnotic charisma. Instead, he had something far more powerful. He was a mirror. In him, the illiterate bastard who had secured a license to plunder a continent, every impoverished hidalgo, every former mercenary, every fugitive criminal saw their own chance. He didn't sell them a dream, he offered them a business plan. His recruitment drive resembled a shareholders' meeting for a brutal startup. He didn't promise them glory, he promised them the right to plunder. He didn't speak of serving the crown, he spoke of percentages of the spoils. His main argument wasn't words, but the very golden trinkets he had shown the emperor. He let them touch them. He let them feel their weight. It was real. It was here. And it was just the beginning. He masterfully played on the single string that resonated in the soul of each of them: greed. He didn't try to appear better than he was. On the contrary, he showed them that he was just like them, hungry, angry, and ready for anything. And that was captivating. They weren't following a noble leader. They were following their own kind, a man who had found the key to the world's greatest treasure and was willing to share. But even within this pack of wolves, he created an inner circle. He brought his brothers with him, Hernando, Juan, Gonzalo, men bound by blood. This was his insurance, his personal guard within the army of adventurers. He wasn't building an army, he was building a perfectly calibrated mechanism for plunder based on a simple principle. Everyone would kill for their share. But within this mechanism, 2 bombs were already ticking. The first was his own partner, Diego de Almagro, a man who had endured the hell of the first 2 expeditions with him, who had invested all his money in this madness and lost an eye in one of the skirmishes. He had been an equal. But when Pizarro returned from Spain with the royal charter, Almagro found himself relegated to a junior partner. Pizarro had claimed all the main titles, governor, general, for himself. He had also carved out lucrative positions for his brothers. Almagro, meanwhile, received only command of a dilapidated fortress. This was more than just an insult, it was public humiliation. Pizarro had pushed him aside from the main prize, demonstrating that in the crucial moment family trumped oaths. And Almagro, an old, battle-hardened soldier, would not forgive this. He nursed a grudge that, like a slow poison, began to corrupt the entire enterprise from within. The second bomb was the most capable of Pizarro's brothers, Hernando. Unlike Francisco, he was legitimate, educated, and incredibly arrogant. It was he who conducted the negotiations at the royal court. He was the brain and political cover for the operation, its respectable facade. And he despised Almagro, this one-eyed upstart. Their mutual hatred flared instantly and became openly hostile. They were like 2 scorpions in a jar, and the entire army of conquistadors split into 2 camps even before they set foot on Inca soil. Pizarro looked south towards the mountains where an empire awaited him. He was preparing for war with the Incas, but he failed to see that the main enemy, the most ruthless and hungry, was sailing with him on the same ship. The civil war among the conquerors began long before they fired the first shot at the Incas. It began the moment Pizarro decided that his blood was more important than his word. In 1532, they finally landed, 180 men, 62 of them mounted. Many were sick. This was no army of conquerors. It was a band of doomed men cast onto a foreign continent. Against them stood an empire spanning thousands of kilometers, with a professional army numbering tens of thousands of warriors. By any logic of war, they should have been obliterated in a single day. And then, diabolical luck smiled upon him. The empire he came to plunder was tearing itself apart. 2 brothers, 2 heirs to the throne, Atahualpa and Huáscar, had just concluded a brutal civil war. The country was exhausted, its elites fractured. Pizarro, the illiterate swineherd, instantly grasped what his aristocratic opponents failed to see. He saw not a monolithic empire, but a gaping wound, and he knew exactly where to strike. He invited the victor, Atahualpa, to a meeting in the city of Cajamarca, without an army, for peaceful negotiations. It was a lie. Cajamarca was a mousetrap. Atahualpa arrived at the zenith of his power. He was carried on a golden palanquin by thousands of servants and warriors dressed in ceremonial attire. He saw no threat in the handful of dirty, bearded foreigners. He saw a curiosity. Meanwhile, Pizarro's men, hidden in the buildings surrounding the square, trembled with fear. They saw a living god before them and understood that their gamble was pure suicide. Everything hinged on a single moment. A priest offered Atahualpa a Bible. The emperor, not understanding what it was, threw it to the ground. This was the signal. Pizarro gave the order, and hell broke loose. The roar of 2 cannons, the blast of arquebuses, the clang of steel, and the wild charge of cavalry, which the Incas were seeing for the first time in their lives. It wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. In a few hours, the emperor's unarmed retinue was slaughtered. Atahualpa himself, the living god, lord of the world, was dragged from his palanquin and taken captive. And then, amidst the glimmer of untold treasures promised for the emperor's ransom, the first bomb exploded. How to divide the spoils? Almagro's men, who arrived later, received paltry crumbs. The old resentment flared with renewed intensity. Hernando Pizarro openly mocked the one-eyed old man. Almagro in turn swore revenge. They had decapitated the Inca Empire with a single blow. But in that very moment, intoxicated by gold, they turned their swords on each other. The greatest robbery in history had devolved into a bloody family quarrel over an inheritance they hadn't even divided yet. Atahualpa kept his word. Caravans of gold and silver streamed in from all corners of the vast empire. The Incas stripped gold plates from the walls of the Coricancha temple, pried off ritual discs, and brought statues from sacred gardens. Priceless, unique works of art, created over centuries, were not even considered as such by the conquistadors. All of it was merely raw material. They lit gigantic fires and melted everything down, transforming the cultural heritage of an entire civilization into featureless ingots. One room was filled with gold, 2 others with silver. In total, almost 24 tons of precious metals, the greatest ransom in human history. Having received it, Pizarro fulfilled his part of the bargain. He arranged a trial for Atahualpa. The trial was a farce. The emperor was accused of idolatry, polygamy, and the murder of his own brother, Huáscar. He was sentenced to be burned at the stake, but at the last moment he was offered a deal. If he accepted Christianity, the execution would be commuted to strangulation. Atahualpa agreed. On July 26, 1533, the last Inca emperor was executed by garrote. Pizarro had gained everything, but the gold that flooded into Spain became not a blessing, but a curse. There was so much of it that it devalued itself. Prices across Europe quadrupled, triggering an economic crisis known as the Price Revolution. The Spanish crown, instead of developing its own production, simply bought everything from abroad, transforming itself into a colossus with feet of clay, completely dependent on colonial supplies. The Inca Empire, decapitated and plundered, ceased to exist, and the Spanish crown, seeing the uncontrollable monsters its venture conquerors were becoming, was horrified. In 1542, the new laws were enacted, sharply limiting the power of the conquistadors and transferring colonial administration directly to officials from Madrid. Pizarro had given the crown untold riches. In return, the crown did everything to ensure that a new Pizarro would never again emerge. But for Pizarro himself, these laws were merely a distant echo from across the ocean. The true threat sat at his own table. The poison he had injected into his enterprise by betraying Almagro's trust finally took effect. The 2 old partners, 2 predators, could no longer share a continent. Their armies clashed at the Battle of Las Salinas. Almagro's men were defeated, and he himself was captured. And Francisco Pizarro made his last fatal mistake. He allowed his brother Hernando to execute his old one-eyed comrade. He showed everyone that for him there was no old friendship, no oaths, only blood and power. And with that, he signed his own death warrant. On June 26, 1541, in the very city of Lima he founded, assassins, supporters of the executed Almagro, stormed his palace. Pizarro, nearing 70, fought like a wolf. But the odds were uneven. He died on the floor of his home, butchered like one of the pigs he herded as a child. He died over the division of spoils from a robbery that had long since ended. So, what remained after him? The Inca gold dissipated in Europe's wars, causing inflation and ultimately impoverishing Spain itself. The empire he built on blood fell into the hands of faceless officials from Madrid. His titles and lands were disputed, his lineage ended. He left behind neither a great dynasty nor a flourishing state. He left only a legend. This is the central paradox of Francisco Pizarro. An illiterate bastard who couldn't even write his own name left an indelible mark on history. This is not a story of glory or wealth. It is the story of how one man, driven solely by hunger and a thirst for revenge, can overturn an entire world. He was nobody and wanted to become everything. And he succeeded. Francisco Pizarro didn't just conquer Peru. He proved a terrible truth. Civilizations are built over centuries, but they crumble the moment a man with absolutely nothing to lose appears at their doorstep.